Hey guys, Coach Bob here. Thanks for joining me for the video cast for lesson 2.2. You might recall that yesterday's lesson we looked at by far the longest chunk of human history, well over 200,000 years, and we jammed two of the key concepts in there. We're going to spend a little bit more time on key concept 1.3, urban civilization and its consequences beginning today. Your task is not only to fill in the blanks on the outline that you've been provided, but also to annotate, add notes. I will point out that for this particular lesson, you're only using the front of that. The back will come up in future lessons. Before we begin, however, I want to point out several focus questions, things to focus your attention. And again, the purpose of these will change as we get into the second unit. But first of all, what exactly is a civilization? And this involves a verb we're going to see a lot in class, identify. How did these civilizations develop, which involves a verb describing, and then why did they develop at all? And that involves a verb explaining. They increase in difficulty as you progress through these, as you will learn very quickly when we do our classroom activities. But I want to focus your attention to those three questions. In order to try to answer that, though, what we're going to do first is sort of take a chronological approach. How did humans get from these things called sites to cities? What I would like you to do is out on the margin, though, write the word chronology, chronological. What we're going to do is begin with sort of like in order. How did this happen? Well, it begins with affluent foragers in the Mesolithic period. These are foragers. They're hunting and gathering their food, but they're living in a time period where there's so much abundance of food that their populations are growing. And as a consequence, there are certain places where they know they're always going to find food, and so they come back to them every single year. They're semi sedentary. They move around, but they come back to the same places. These lead to the earliest sites. This is an artist rendition from the archaeological remains of a site in modern day Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. The thing to note here, though, is this isn't like a city. Like people aren't living here, and yet uh, people returned back to the same place at the same time every single year. It appears to be some sort of early form of temple. There was some sort of ritual going on here, and people from all over would come back to this same site every single year. So we're starting to get this notion of people attached to a particular place. Then we get sedentary farmers in the Neolithic period. Sedentary meaning they're not moving around. Why? Because they can grow food. They don't have to move around. They can grow plants. And if they're really lucky, as we'll see later on, they could also domesticate animals. Consequently, the population increases. Now we get uh, human populations of dozens of people. These are known as settlements. A pretty famous one is Banpo in what is now China, a settlement. And if you look at the image down here, you can kind of see there's a bunch of houses around this area, the center of which includes this larger structure. What was in the larger structure? We don't know. It could have been that's the place where the council of elders met, but it also could have been where the chief lived. A chief, remember, gets his authority because people trust him. It's charisma. He gains their respect, and so they just agree to follow him. We're not sure which that is, but also notice there's a kind of ditch, a kind of protective area around the living space. The area leading down would lead then to the farmland. But this is the next step. You've got slightly larger communities that aren't moving because they don't have to, because they could actually grow their food. That will eventually lead to agrarian villages. Now we're getting into density, demographic density of hundreds of people. Two really famous places, early agricultural villages, include Jericho and Çatalhöyük. Jericho, you might have noticed, is referenced repeatedly in the Old Testament of the Bible. Here is an image from the granary of Jericho. And the granary is an important thing because that's where they stored all of the grain, the food that they had grown throughout the growing period, but they could leave it there, store it, and that allowed for populations to expand because they always had a reserve of food. This image is an artist renditioning of Çatalhöyük, which is again in modern day Turkey. But you'll notice the living density. Every single one of those areas is a family home, and the only way you could access them is from the roof, I might point out. But what we see is density is increasing. Now you've got these communities of hundreds of people living in smaller areas until eventually we get to the first cities. Now we're talking about thousands of people crammed into the same size space. Two of the earliest cities that we have evidence of are in Mesopotamia and Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. Here is an artist's reconstruction of the archaeological remains of where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet. You can see now the whole layout is much larger and the density of people living there much larger. In this image, also an artist reconstruction of archaeological remains of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the earliest cities in the Indus Valley. Again, you see that same thing. You see that the density is increasing. We're getting to thousands of people crammed into much smaller space. This is a process of urbanization. How do we get then from cities to civilization? Well, a better question is, what is that transition? Let's look at the transition from cities to civilization. First, by asking the question, what happened? Again, this involves the verb identify. What happened? Well, there's a tipping point. At some point, the density of human populations tips from being just a city into a civilization. The problem is we don't exactly know what that number is. We don't know how dense does a human population have to become until it becomes a civilization. We just don't know. What about the question of how it happened, the verb describing? We do know a little bit more about this. For example, we know that it has its roots in agricultural production. You have to be able to grow high quality plants to feed a growing population. We also know that they occur in areas where uh, river valleys are not only providing the soil to grow the plants, but whether through diffusion or migration, or they just had them in the first place, they also support animal domestication. Those places that have the best combination of those, which are, in the case of Afro-Eurasia at any rate, always in river valleys, are going to benefit the most. This then leads back to a variation of a diagram you might remember seeing earlier, which was part of Jared Diamond's thesis. That allows a food surplus. There's more than enough food. You can store food. Why is that a big deal? Because that means now you can have people focus on particular jobs that do not involve producing food. There's enough food that you can feed these people to start thinking and learning and experimenting with how to do different things. That in turn leads to new structures. Now, when we talk about new structures, the first thing that comes to mind is like buildings. Yeah, buildings are structures, but we're talking about other types of structures, like social structures, like political structures, like cultural structures. In other words, now you've got these people who can focus their time on doing things that have nothing to do with producing food. The hardest question always, though, is why. Explaining why something happened. Why did cities go from this certain point to the point we call them civilizations? And the truth is, we simply don't know. We don't even know what the tipping point is. So, how can we explain why it happened at all? Now, I should point out there's a whole bunch of different theories about this, but there's not a whole lot of evidence, and there's definitely not a consensus among archaeologists, anthropologists, and historians. We just don't know why it happened. That leads to the question then, okay, what exactly is a civilization? If we don't know what happened exactly and we don't know why it happened, what is a civilization? Well, we're going to do an activity in class looking at the difficulty of trying to define that. But a better approach, the approach we're going to take is you might be a civilization if you have certain characteristics. In other words, if you have these things, you're probably a civilization. These are known as the 5 features of civilization, and they are absolutely crucial. The first of these is urbanization. You have to start with cities before you can become a civilization. You got to have cities. In fact, our word civilization comes from the Latin word cives, which means citizens of the city of Rome, urban dwellers. It's built right into our English word. You got to have cities. Second, you have to have a state level government. Now, again, we'll get into the notion of states later on, but the key idea for right now is this represents a centralization of power. In other words, there's a chain of command and somebody is at the top. The person at the top for almost all of the civilizations, although we'll see there's some unusual exceptions, are kings. Kingdoms, remember, are different from chiefdoms in terms of how they get their authority to rule. Chiefs get their authority from charisma. Whatever it is that they're doing, they get people to like them enough that they're going to follow them. Kings, on the other hand, rule through force, or at least the threat of force. But the other thing to recognize about that is they're the only ones who they claim have the right to use force. They are allowed to punish people for not following the law, for example, but if you just decide you don't like somebody, so you beat the crap out of them, that's not allowed. So the kingdom, the state, is the one that gets to decide whether or not force is justified. But it also includes this notion of bureaucrats. That is to say, the king cannot do everything to run the day to day affairs of the state. So there is a bureaucracy, a system of people who do things like administer justice, manage the resources, collect the taxes, organize the labor. These people are the ones actually running the government. But again, the key is there's a kind of chain of command. They're following orders who are following orders from ultimately, in most places, the king. The third feature is social stratification, layers of class, hierarchies. Some people are higher status than others. This is a fundamental feature of civilizations, but it happens, as we'll see, in very different ways. What they share, though, in most cases, is the distribution of wealth and power. Who gets the benefits of this particular system? Those benefits are measured in wealth and power. Typically, those hierarchies, those pyramids, if you will, include some variation of elites at the top, commoners at the middle, and then the people at the bottom. In many of these social hierarchies, there are slaves, but as we'll see, not in all. And that's a significant difference. Similarly, patriarchy is a stratification in which men are above women. Men literally rule over women. So social stratification tends to be a characteristic of civilizations. Fourth, we have public works. Now, this is one that I've noticed in the past a lot of students have a hard time with. These are large scale labor projects. In other words, you have to get a whole bunch of people to work to do them. Okay? A whole lot of people doing things they don't necessarily want to do. It's not like it's fun. There's two main types of public works. One is infrastructure. So these would be things like digging canals for irrigation, building temples, building city walls. Other examples, as we'll see, the thing that infrastructure has in common, they're large labor projects. You need a bunch of people to work in order to make them, but they benefit the common good. In other words, the general population benefits from infrastructure. That is contrasted with monumental architecture, which, while it also requires a very large labor force to do stuff they don't really want to do, the difference is who it benefits. Monumental architecture typically benefits those people in power. The whole purpose of it, it's a monument to how great the people in power are, so that everybody who sees it goes, wow, whoever built that, that is a very special person, or as we'll see, a god, not even a person. Fifth among the features is writing. Now, in most cases, but as we'll see, not all, the purpose of writing was simply to record transactions, business transactions, but also taxes. It's a record of what you pay and what you receive. Later on, people figure out, though, that you can use that same system to identify ideas and beliefs and stories. And so, writing generally will transform into this thing that's used for all sorts of purposes that were not originally intended, again, which in most cases was just to record transactions, to have a record of some sort of exchange between people. Let's come back to our focus questions for just a moment. What is a civilization? Well, the truth is there's no real good definition. And it's not entirely clear. The purpose of the activity we're going to do tomorrow is to make it obvious to you why a definition is particularly troublesome. Instead, the way we're going to do it is, what are the features and how do you meet them? The second question, though, is how did civilizations develop? We know a bit more about this. We can describe how they happened. The main issue is a increasing concentration of human population density, demographics, until at some point, although we don't know when, it flips from a city into a civilization. And we also know that food production is at the base of that. The why, again, we really don't know. There are a ton of different theories, including my all-time favorite, absolutely not, aliens. That's why. We just don't know. There are plenty of theories, but the evidence is tough to come by, and there definitely is not a consensus among the people studying that. Now, there's an additional thing I need you to know about today's lesson. You should be able to list and define the 5 features of a civilization. Now, we're going to spend a couple of days in class looking at that, so it's not necessarily something you need to memorize, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to begin really sort of drilling yourself on what the 5 features are and also what they mean. Like, knowing public works is one of the 5 features is great, But if you don't know what public works means exactly, that's not really helping you. I want to thank you for your attention. I tried to keep this video short. I know the last one was a little too long. I'm afraid the next one's going to be, but I really appreciate your attention. If you were able to fill in the blanks and annotate, make sure you bring the front sheet of the outline into class for a stamp. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you in class. Thanks again.